How do you win the Stanley Cup? Some of hockey's greatest philosophers have attempted to narrow down the answer to this problem, and yet there's still no definitive strategy that will guarantee a Stanley Cup. That's because, frankly, there isn't one. Each Stanley Cup champion has a road to the cup so unique to them, it'd be almost impossible to try and fully replicate that success. Take, for example, the 2018-19 St. Louis Blues. If I told you, without context, that a team fired their head coach in November, barely a month after the season started, and was in last place in the entire league in January, there is almost no way you'd assume that that team would be lifting the cup in June. That kind of stuff doesn't happen in real life. That stuff only happens in fairy tales. Nevertheless, that Blues team won the Stanley Cup, further redefining our understanding of what it takes for a team to win the Stanley Cup. It might have been a very unorthodox path, but it's the path that finally led the Blues to hockey immortality after so many decades of dead-end roads. So come with me as we traverse this path from its beginning to its conclusion. Heading into the 2018-19 season, there was a lot to be hopeful about. After missing the playoffs the year prior by only 1 point, the Blues spent the summer bolstering their forward core with the addition of guys like Ryan O'Reilly, David Perron, Tyler Bozak, and Patrick Maroon to help give the team the jolt it needed. But through the first 19 games of the 2018-19 season, this new-look Blues team struggled out of the gate, starting the year 7-9-3. For a team looking to improve from their 24th ranked goals per game unit in 2017-18, the Blues only saw modest improvement, as they barely managed to score 2.92 goals per game in the opening 19-game stretch, ranking just 19th in the league in that same time span. At a glance, it appeared as though the Blues still lacked firepower in their lineup, but we can go deeper. By expected goals for per 60, the stat that measures how many goals a team can expect to score based on the quality of their chances, the Blues found themselves near the bottom of the league, as the general quality of their shots were lackluster not only at all situations, but at 5-on-5 as well. This is partly why the team lacked aforementioned firepower. Some of the best goal-scoring teams find ways to consistently create high-quality shots, and the more high-quality shots a team takes, the higher their expected goals total will usually be. However, the inverse is also true. A team that lacks the ability to consistently create high-quality shots will usually see it reflected in a lower expected goals total. Here, shot quality mattered. When you compare the Blues' expected goals total to their actual goal total through the first 19 games, you'll quickly realize that even though they were an average goal-scoring team relative to the league average, the Blues were actually overachieving relative to their own expected value, and things could have been a lot worse than they already were. That's probably not something teams in a slump want to hear in an attempt to try and make them feel better, but I digress. Let us instead now talk about the goaltending, or lack thereof, that the Blues received to begin their 2018-19 campaign. Spoiler alert, it was not very good. The Blues had the 18th ranked team save percentage at all situations, and the 27th ranked save percentage at 5-on-5. In other words, they could not get a save to save their lives. Taking it a step further and using goals saved above expected, a stat that uses expected goals to measure the quality of shots a goalie faces, Chad Johnson led the way with a 0.87 goals saved above expected through 7 appearances, while Jake Allen struggled immensely, putting up a negative 6.6 goals saved above expected in 14 appearances. Those numbers are very not good. So, collectively, you have a team that can't really generate offense, and their goaltending is doing them little to no favors on an average night. That is not a recipe for winning hockey games, and it reflected in their 7-9-3 record to start the year. And as a result, it cost head coach Mike Yeo his job. After a 2-0 loss to the Los Angeles Kings on November 19th, 2018, the Blues relieved Mike Yeo of his coaching duties and named Craig Berube interim head coach. For Berube, his job would be to try and get these Blues back on track before things went from bad to ugly. To say that things magically fixed themselves overnight after changing head coaches would be a bit premature. Through the first 18 games with Craig Berube at the helm, the Blues went an unimpressive 8-9-1, bringing their record on the year to a lousy 15-18-4. By the end of the night of January 2nd, 2019, the Blues sat dead last in the league by points, behind rebuilding teams like Ottawa and Los Angeles. But the Berube Blues were different from Yeo's Blues, even if the surface record didn't look all that different. Under Yeo, so, the Blues were constantly bleeding high danger chances, giving up about 11 high danger chances against per 60 at 5-on-5, and at all situations, marks that were below the league average. Through Berube's first 18 games, the Blues started to clean up their game, becoming a top 5 team at limiting the number of high danger chances they allowed, surrendering just 9.81 high danger chances per 60 at all situations and 9.01 high danger chances at 5-on-5. 2 fewer high danger chances per 60 minutes doesn't seem like a lot, but over the course of an 82-game season, those chances can start to pile up. Each extra high danger chance is another opportunity for the opposing team to either shift the momentum in a game towards their side or put the game completely out of reach. That's why limiting such chances is super important. Even if it's only 2 fewer chances, it's still 2 potentially game-changing chances that don't happen, and chances that don't happen can't be converted into goals. In the case of the Blues, even though this newfound strong defensive play wasn't yet translating into wins, it still served a very valuable purpose, as very important foundations were being built that would pay massive dividends down the line, but more on that later. For now, it's back to the expected stats that pop their heads in again. Expected goals against per 60, a stat that measures how many goals a team can expect to allow based on shot quality, also noticed the Blues' better overall team defensive play. While the team's all-situation ranking remained mostly the same, the biggest improvement was at 5-on-5. What was a mostly middle-of-the-pack team by expected goals against under Yeo had become the 4th most difficult team to score goals on under Berube. In theory. I say in theory because even though the team defense had improved, the goaltending regressed hard. Through Berube's first 18 games, the Blues had the 3rd worst team save percentage at all situations, only ahead of Philadelphia and San Jose. At 5-on-5, it ranked 25th out of 31 NHL teams. No team is going to win a lot of games with that kind of goaltending. Goals saved above expected doesn't paint a very pretty picture either. No Blues goalie had a positive goal saved above expected in that time span. Jordan Binnington led the way with his negative 2.18 goals saved above expected in just 2 relief appearances, followed by Jake Allen and Chad Johnson respectively. For his efforts, Johnson would be waived on December 10th and claimed by the Anaheim Ducks shortly thereafter. So, after all of that, as the night of January 2nd, 2019 came to a close, what's the situation? Well, you've got a team that has shown tangible signs of improvement, even if the record doesn't say so, but the team also doesn't have any semblance of goaltending. Maybe things turn around for the better, maybe the Blues are picking first overall in the draft. I mean, it's not like the Blues are going to flip a switch and become a machine practically overnight. After a 2-game split that saw the Blues beat the Capitals and lose to the Islanders, the Blues went into their game against the Philadelphia Flyers on January 7th, 2019 with a rookie Jordan Binnington making his first NHL start. On that night, Jordan Binnington stopped all 25 shots that the Flyers threw at him, collecting his first career NHL shutout. Unbeknownst at the time would be the fact that that night would be a sign of fortunes that were about to change. From January 7th onward, the goaltending woes that had plagued the Blues all season long became one of the team's greatest strengths. Jordan Binnington and Jake Allen both had positive goals saved above expected numbers, and more specifically, Jordan Binnington's 9.78 goals saved above expected was the 5th highest mark among all NHL goalies in that time span. In terms of save percentage, the Blues goaltending tandem produced the 5th highest team save percentage at all situations and the 4th best at 5-on-5. For a team that had gotten used to average at best, terrible at worst goaltending for most of the season, this sudden shift was a breath of fresh air. Their goaltenders, and more specifically Binnington, could finally come up with the big save when the team needed it. That was huge considering that earlier in the season, even if a team had a hard time generating a lot of quality chances against the Blues team defense, they could at least hope for one of the Blues' goaltenders to make a mistake or allow a really soft goal. After January, teams were going to need to really earn their goals against the Blues, especially since the Blues team defense that was already on a heater was about to get even better too. From January onward, no team was harder to generate high danger scoring chances against than the St. Louis Blues, at all situations and at 5-on-5. By expected goals against per 60, they had the lowest mark out of all teams in all situations. In other words, the Blues team defense was one of the best, if not the best team in the league at stifling their opponents' offense. This is where those pivotal foundations I mentioned earlier come into play. The Blues didn't just learn to play strong defense over the course of one night. It was something instilled in them early on during Craig Berube's tenure. It wasn't yet translating into wins when the Blues were dealing with atrocious goaltending, but it did set the stage for them to go on a run if they could maintain their style of play and get stable goaltending from someone, anyone. Lo and behold, that's exactly what ended up happening. However, their offensive renaissance also shouldn't go unrecognized. Under Yeo, the Blues' expected goals for per 60 was putrid. It slightly improved under Berube before the calendar year flipped, especially at 5-on-5, but there was still another gear for this team to get to. Try top 10 in the league on for size. This Blues team that had so much difficulty with generating quality shots in offense all season long was now one of the best teams in the league at getting good quality looks and shots, and naturally, that converted into points. Primarily leading the way was the Blues' four-headed monster of Tarasenko, O'Reilly, Schenn, and Pietrangelo, as each player put up 30 or more points in the final 45 games of the regular season. But more specifically, I really want to highlight the production of Vladimir Tarasenko. After only scoring 11 goals in his first 36 games of the season, Tarasenko's goal production would explode after January, as he would go on to score 22 goals in his next 39 games. In fact, in that same time span, only 6 NHL players scored more goals than Tarasenko. He was a superstar for the Blues, a player who could put the puck into the net when his team needed him to. With his contributions, along with those of his teammates, the St. Louis Blues had become a well-oiled machine at all facets of the game, especially at 5-on-5. On the night that the Blues were last place in the league, they had 45 games left on the docket to play. They won 30 of them, finishing the year on a 30-10-5 run, a 118-point pace over 82 games. By season's end, the Blues had accumulated 99 points in the standings and were officially going to the Stanley Cup playoffs. The road to 16 wins and hockey immortality begins now. To open the Stanley Cup playoffs, the Blues traveled north to Winnipeg for the first 2 games of their first-round series. Even with the Winnipeg whiteout in full force, the Blues took games 1 and 2, going up 2-0 in this best-of-7 series before heading back to St. Louis. However, just as home ice advantage proved to be a non-factor in Winnipeg, the Jets would come into St. Louis and take games 3 and 4 against the Blues, shifting the series back to Winnipeg with the two teams deadlocked at 2 games apiece. Now, it was a best-of-3. Hoping to turn the tides in Game 5, the Jets went into the third period of Game 5 with a 2-goal lead, and were only 20 minutes away from going back to St. Louis with a chance to close out the series. That was until the Blues staged a third period comeback. Ryan O'Reilly got the Blues on the board, Braden Schenn tied the game, and then with just 15 seconds left in regulation, Jaden Schwartz scored the game-winning goal that put the Blues in front. For Schwartz, it would be the first goal in what would end up being a monster run for him. Starting from Game 5 against Winnipeg and ending in Game 5 against the Sharks, he scored 12 goals in 14 playoff games, nearly a goal per game pace. In fact, he scored so many goals during this hot streak and had such a big lead on his teammates, he actually ended up finishing the playoffs as St. Louis's leading goal scorer, even though he didn't score a single goal in his final 8 playoff games. But back to the Winnipeg series, and the Blues now returned home with a chance to punch their ticket to the second round of the playoffs. With the home crowd behind them and Jaden Schwartz's first hat-trick of the postseason leading the way, the Blues won Game 6 by a final score of 3-2, ending the series after 6 games. Very rarely do storybook moments happen in real life, but come on. A team that was in last place in the entire league in January of all months winning a playoff series? How can you not be romantic about hockey? Regardless, the Blues' second-round opponent would be the Dallas Stars, fresh off of their first-round upset of the Central Division champion Nashville Predators. The two teams would split the first 2 games played in St. Louis before heading to Dallas with the series tied at 1 game apiece. The Blues would take Game 3, but would drop the next 2 games, falling behind in the series 3-2. For the first time in these playoffs, the Blues were going to face elimination, needing a win in Dallas to extend the series and force a winner-take-all Game 7 back in St. Louis. With their backs against the wall, the Blues showed up for Game 6 and kept their season alive, beating the Stars by a final score of 4-1. this series would go the full 7 games. In Game 7, Vince Dunn would open the scoring, beating Ben Bishop to give the Blues the early lead. However, Matt Zuccarello would respond only 2 minutes later, tying the game at 1 goal apiece. After that, the Blues and the Stars shut the door on one another, neither side allowing a single goal through the remainder of regulation. This game, and this series, was going to be decided in sudden death overtime. For the winner, a trip to the Western Conference Final. For the loser, an early summer. And if the stakes weren't already high enough, one overtime proved not enough to separate these two teams. Double overtime, at minimum, would be required. In the end, they didn't need more than 2 overtime periods, as the St. Louis native Pat Maroon would end the series right then and there, eliminating the Dallas Stars and sending the Blues to the 3rd round of the playoffs. This game was, arguably, a testament to the Blues' ability to play in and win close playoff games. After the 2nd round of the playoffs, 9 of the Blues' 13 playoff games were decided by just 1 goal. Their record in 1-goal games? 7-2. In fact, they had more wins in 1-goal games than the other 3 conference finalists had 1-goal games played. These Blues did not shake under pressure. If anything, it made them stronger. For now though, it was off to San Jose for a date with the Sharks in the West Final. In Game 1, the Sharks would rain on the Blues' parade, taking Game 1 by a final score of 6-3. Unfazed, the Blues battled back in Game 2 to even the series, heading back to St. Louis for Game 3. After going down 2-0 and 3-1 early in Game 3, the Blues answered back with 3 unanswered goals to take the lead. With just a minute left in regulation, and after a great chance to seal the game with an empty net goal, the Sharks tied the game at 4 goals apiece to send the game to overtime. In overtime, Erik Karlsson scored the game-winning goal that totally wasn't controversial at all, and everyone accepts that there was nothing wrong with it and therefore requires no further explanation. Alright, moving on. The Blues returned to the ice ready to play in Game 4, taking an early lead in the first period that they would never relinquish, sending the series back to San Jose tied at 2 games apiece. The objective in front of the Blues was clear: win 2 out of the next 3 games and you get to go play in the Stanley Cup Final. The Blues did exactly that, winning games 5 and 6 against the Sharks by scores of 5-0 and 5-1 respectively. For the first time in nearly 50 years, the St. Louis Blues were going back to the Stanley Cup Final. Just to emphasize how long St. Louis waited, their 48-season Cup Final drought was the 2nd longest active drought at the time, trailing only the lowly Toronto Maple Leafs. But now, the only thing left standing in their way was 4 wins against an old nemesis, the Boston Bruins, looking to capture their 2nd Stanley Cup in 9 years. Game 1 would start off promising for the Blues, as they would take a 2-0 lead early into the 2nd period, but the Bruins would respond with 4 unanswered goals of their own to take Game 1. Game 2 saw the two teams trading goals with one another in the first period before both teams clamped things down and didn't allow another goal in regulation. This game was going to overtime. After all of the hard work it took to get to this point, the Blues desperately don't want to go back to St. Louis down 2-0 in this series. Luckily, they wouldn't have to. Carl Gunnarsson is the overtime hero, giving the Blues their first ever win in a Stanley Cup Final game. Here's a fun fact: this was, and still is, his only career playoff goal. He literally couldn't have picked a better moment. The Blues were heading back to St. Louis with the series tied at 1 game apiece. Unfortunately, they got pummeled in Game 3 to the tune of 7-2. The Blues, however, held firm, winning Game 4 on home ice and tying the series once again. Back to Boston we go for a pivotal Game 5, both teams now just 2 wins away from the Stanley Cup. Ryan O'Reilly opened the scoring in the 2nd period of Game 5, and in the 3rd period, David Perron scored a goal that totally wasn't controversial at all, and everyone accepts that there was nothing wrong with it and therefore requires no further explanation. Alright, moving on. The Blues, for the first time in their history, were just 1 win away from eternal glory. 1 win away from cementing themselves in hockey history forever. And to top it all off, Game 6 was in St. Louis. They could lift the cup in front of their own home crowd, as thousands of passionate fans watched. That didn't happen. The Bruins decisively took Game 6 by a score of 5-1, pushing this series to Game 7. A true winner-take-all Game 7. The winner gets the Stanley Cup. The loser walks away empty-handed. It's a scenario that every hockey player dreams about, but seldom does it happen in reality. For the Blues and Bruins, this was no dream. This was the reality they lived in heading into the final hours before Game 7. For both teams, a journey that began in October was going to come to an end. All all of the blood, sweat, and tears that went into getting to this moment was going to pay off for one team and be all for naught for the other. On that day, the St. Louis Blues put their stamp on the history books. They were going to be the joke of the league no longer. The St. Louis Blues were going to be a Stanley Cup winning organization. The Blues went into Boston and won a hockey game by a final score of 4-1. For the first time in their history, the magical words that Blues fans had waited over 50 years to hear finally became reality. The St. Louis Blues are the Stanley Cup champions, and there wasn't anything or anyone that could ever take that away from them. Years and years of agony and anguish washed away in a magical moment. As the Stanley Cup was lifted and partied with by those wearing the blue note for the first time in NHL history, a true fairy tale story came to its end. They all lived happily ever after.